It's a little after 9, and if we're ready to get right for our esteemed colleague, Representative Gartner, to get seated down. Glad to see you, sir. Okay, welcome to the House Energy Committee. We're in session. First thing up, welcome to everybody that's here. Appreciate what the weather we're having, that everybody shows up. So we got a good crowd today. Looks good. Second is looking for approval of the minutes from February 4th. By Representative Berkowitz, seconded by Representative McGinn. Neighbors, I want to call you McGinney for some reason. I need to get me a seating chart. Excuse me for that. This mask makes me lose my memory. All those in favor, or any corrections or comments on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Minutes approved. Next on the agenda, final action on bills previously heard. HB 2145, exempting the realty sale of electricity and public utilities at electric vehicle charging stations from the jurisdiction of the State Corporation Commission. Mr. Reviser, would you give us, Nick, are you on here? You're up, Nick.
I am, Mr. Chairman. Your bill brief was pretty darn good, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, committee, House Bill 21.
Let me clarify that. That's probably Barbara, okay? Not me.
Yeah, committee, House Bill 2145 exempts from public utility regulation electricity that is purchased through a retail electric supplier within that supplier's certified territory for the sole purpose of electric vehicle charging service and services to end users. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Representative Keither?
Nick, what this passed last year, didn't it, out of here, or did it get caught up?
Yeah, it did. I think Representative Schreiber corrected me. The last meeting, it passed last year out of this committee, and then it also passed the floor of the House as well.
Right. Okay. So, but it got over to the Senate, and then the pandemic hit.
Yeah, the Senate, I think, took some provisions of another, the EcoDevo and contract rates provisions that we heard about last year, and put those into 2020 House Bill 2585. And this provision did not stay in that bill.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the reviser? Representative Delperdang.
Chairman, just a quick question, Nick, was this the bill that passed out last year? Is that the one that got the amendment for the utility poles down in Wichita, or am I thinking of a different one? Do you remember?
Yeah, certainly. No, you're thinking correct. There was a floor amendment last year on that bill dealing with the urban electric transmission line siting.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I guess we don't have any other on video. Do I hear a motion to move this bill out favorable?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to move the bill, please.
Representative Delperdang moves to favorable for out. Second, Emil, or Representative Berkowitz. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of moving this bill out favorable for passage, say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Seeing none, pass. Moving on, next item on our agenda is a hearing on 2181, requiring state corporation, I'm gonna have to pull this mask down, I can't talk with it in my mouth. Requiring the State Corporation Commission to provide for the legislature an annual report to electric rates and electric public utilities of the reasons. Mr. Reviser, Nick, would you give us an overview, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, you're stealing all my thunder today. So yeah, committee, House Bill 2181 would require the Kansas Corporation Commission to issue an annual report to the legislature. This report would provide a comparison of regional electric rates compared to Kansas electric rates. This report would be required to compare the Kansas rates against at least 9 other states in the region, including the contiguous states to Kansas. The KCC would not be required to include electric rate information for entities that are not regulated by the KCC. These are municipal utilities and cooperatives. And then this report, as per current law, could be issued by the KCC on their website, and they just notify the legislature that the report is available, or it could be provided directly to the legislature. And I'd be happy to stand for questions, committee and Mr. Chair.
Any questions from the reviser, Mr. Nick? Seeing none? Moving on. First, for the proponents of the committee for the bill, we have Paul Snyder, Principal, Snyder Public Affairs. Mr. Snyder, welcome to the Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications. Would you please state your name?
Morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Paul Snyder. I am representing the Kansas Industrial Consumers Group and Kansans for Lower Electric Rates. Our groups got active in the legislature in 2018, principally to bring around some transparency to how Kansas rates compared to other states. We think that there are some real challenges for all ratepayers with the level of rates in Kansas, and we've been working on various things to moderate those and get us in a better position to achieve competitive regional electric rates. This bill is, as it was described, really a pretty simple bill. The legislature, the Kansas Corporation Commission currently provides you a very thorough, substantial report each year. I think it's on or about February 1st. It covers all the regulated utilities in the state and talks about how their rates may have changed if they're involved in certain regulatory proceedings. Talks about, at least on the electric side, their electric demand requirements and what their supply resources are to match up with those. So this bill, House Bill 2181, would simply amend the current statute 66-117B and ask them to include a couple pages, or how many ever pages it takes, to compare Kansas rates to our neighboring states, and then up to 9 states or more if the KCC chooses to do that. Simply just a transparency bill, so that as you all work on these issues, you can then determine whether Kansas is making strides in closing the gap between our rates and other states, or if we're falling a little behind and need to give it some extra attention. It's certainly not intended to be controversial, and I'm not up here to give a big dialogue into how our rates, what they are, or how they got to this place, especially knowing my friend Chuck Casey is going to come up behind me. But I do just want to mention a couple things. There was a Kansas Chamber-sponsored energy policy call last Friday. It was mentioned by some folks at Evergy that maybe this should include a 5-year look back on rates, so you can determine, maybe Evergy rates went down last year, and they want to make sure that people see that. We've got no objection to that whatsoever. There was also some conversation about maybe this report should include a little more context. So maybe you see a rate decline or a rate increase. Maybe there's some context around why that happened. We also don't have a challenge with that. We are cautious, though, about turning this into a bigger report than what was intended. It was intended just to give a snapshot view so you can tell whether we're closing the gap or widening the gap with regard to competitive electric rates. So really, we'll look forward to see what the other conferees have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions for you, and would encourage you to pass this out favorably at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Is there any questions from Mr. Snyder? Seeing none? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate you coming to committee. Next up, person, Jessica Lucas. Jessica, are you here? Oh, Jason, didn't recognize you.
I cut my hair, Mr. Chairman.
Well, your part's crooked like mine. I have that same problem. Welcome to committee.
Right.
State your name and who you're with for the record, would you please?
Jason Watkins, appearing for the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. I think is that what you had on the list? So, and I'll be very quick. Mr. Snyder, I think, covered it well. But the chamber does support House Bill 2181. We think this would be a good exercise, a positive step, in large part just in order to help inform you so that we can maintain competitive electric rates. And we did want to emphasize electricity rates are a competitiveness issue when it comes to capital investment, job creation in the state. I talk often in the commerce committees, tax committees about the South Central Kansas economy. It's heavily reliant on advanced manufacturing. Those are great industries, very high paying jobs, great benefits. They've created a middle class that I like to say is the envy of the United States. But it's also important to understand most of our advanced manufacturers, whether they're located here or even if they're headquartered here, do have sites in other states and even other countries. And it's become common now for those companies to compete against themselves. And I'll give one example, and that's OxyChem, which is in Wichita. OxyChem has locations throughout the United States. When OxyChem gets the opportunity to make a product for a customer, their corporate office sends that out in bid form to each of the OxyChem locations. And then each general manager puts together his package on what he can produce that for. OxyChem, at least the last time I checked, was the largest electric user in the state of Kansas. Obviously, electric rates matter when OxyChem in Wichita is creating a competitive bid with an OxyChem location that's in Houston, Texas. So I just use that as an example, Mr. Chairman, to illustrate how electric rates are a big part of economic competitiveness for the state of Kansas. This bill doesn't address electric rates. It just allows you and the citizens of this state to see where we are in terms of rates. That informs management. That also informs you as policymakers, which is a positive thing. So with that, we would urge that you pass the bill out favorably, and I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think while you're up there, let's go for questions. Any questions? Representative Delperdang?
Thank you, Chairman. Good to see you, Jason.
Good to see you, sir.
Just a curiosity question. It was line 22 on the bill, but it talks about comparing the public utility rates from at least 9 states in the region. Is that, do we need to narrow it down? To me, that's kind of an ambiguous type of a statement, because we could pick and choose which ones look best to it.
I think the bill says 9 states, but it requires the states that are contiguous with Kansas, right?
Let's do that.
So I think that's important, but for example, we compete an awful lot with Texas. Our economy is never going to be the size of Texas. I was reading the other day that the Texas economy is bigger than the Russian economy. We're not ever going to rival that, but we still do need to be able to compete. So I think it might be worth the legislature tightening that up a little bit to say those states that are contiguous with Kansas, but also these states. We're often compared to Iowa. That's probably a good state to take a look at. So I think you may be onto something there, Representative.
Are you aware, I know in Texas they have, is the term wheeling?
Retail wheeling?
Retail wheeling, but I don't know which other states may do that, and would it be fair to compare it to them or not is another question. But
yeah, I don't know. We're getting outside my level of expertise pretty quick on retail wheeling.
Representative Schreiber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason. A couple of questions. One, in your experience in the Wichita area, is price the only criteria that's assessed by these large users when looking at their electric supply?
Ask your question again?
So are they only looking at price, or do they look at other aspects
Like
of the supply? Yeah.
Yeah, reliability, et cetera, sure.
Yeah. Okay. And I assume, I think this information comparing different states around us and so forth with our rates, I think is readily available. Why would we want to put something like that in statute if we could easily obtain it through other means?
Yeah, I don't know that it is readily available. I don't know that this committee right now receives a report of what those rates are. So I think this just helps ensure that that happens. As I said in my testimony, I make reference to obviously management practices and management decisions have a impact on rates. So too do the decisions of policymakers, including all of you sitting here and those with the KCC. So I think this just adds another layer of transparency, creates another opportunity, not just for the citizens, but for you as policymakers to take a look at where we stand with rates.
Well, we may disagree on this, but with the rate study that we just paid for, and we're going to hear from the AECom, I think on Thursday, I believe, that I think we've already got this information, but anyway, I still, maybe we'll hear from other conferees about whether the information is readily available or not, but thank you again.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as I understand it, the rate study that the legislature paid for was a one-time thing, but I'm not an expert in this area. My understanding of this bill is this would be done ongoing. So those would be two very different things.
I believe if I understand it right, I guess we could ask Nick for sure what the bill is. It's not to legislate any rate studies. It's just to observe them. Is that correct, Nick?
Yeah, this would be an ongoing annual report due by that February 1st of each year.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Any other questions for Jason? Seeing none. Jason, thank you for coming.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good day, be careful. Next up, any other oral testimony here? Seeing none, we'll move to written proponent testimony. First on the list is we're still on the proponent yet. We'll get to the neutral when we get done with the proponents. Yeah, we still got proponents. Did I say opponents? If I did, I'll correct it. It's the mask. I can't do it with it on there or without it on there. I don't know. Okay, let's move on. For written, we have David Nickel, but I see David's here. Would you like to just introduce yourself to the committee so they move it since you're here? Please step up to the mic so they can hear you online too.
So sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Nickel. I'm the Consumer Counsel for the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, which represents residential and small commercial ratepayers before the KCC and the Kansas Legislature. And I have nothing to add. I thought the two speakers before did an affable job of presenting the aspects of the bill. Thank you.
And his testimony is in your deal. Thank you, David. Randy Stuckey. Made words there. Vice Senior President, Government Affairs. General Counsel, Joint Written Testimony from the Kansas Feed and Grain Dealers Association, Renewed Kansas Biofuels Association, Kansas Agricultural Retailers Association. That's a pretty long list. Randy, would you be in here just to introduce yourself to the committee? Okay, see now you have the information of Randy's report in your packet. Elizabeth Patton, State Director for Americans for Prosperity, Kansas. Be in your packet here also. You had a chance to read it. I don't believe she's here, so. Next on the list is Eric Stafford, Vice President, Government Affairs, Kansas Chamber of Commerce. Eric, I think, did I see you or not? Seeing him not here. Turn my page. No other written proponents. We will move to the opponent section. I have no conferees in person for opponents. Is there anybody? Seeing none, we'll move to the neutral position now. Neutral, I have in person Leslie Kaufman, Vice President, Government Relations and Legal Counsel for Kansas Electric Co-op. Leslie, welcome to committee. Please state your name and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Leslie Kaufman. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations and Legal Counsel for Kansas Electric Cooperatives, and we have submitted testimony today along with Kansas Municipal Utilities. Both of our organizations are described in our testimony. Our associations have long engaged in education efforts with our consumers and those that use our electricity. We believe in having open dialogue with our member consumers and providing good, solid information to them. But we do have a few questions to raise about the study, and one of those would be, why is a state agency tasked with this? We believe that the answers that are sought through the bill really can be put together from publicly available data, and if the proponents wanted to assemble that data, that it could. If there is data that isn't publicly available, we believe that it's probably being protected as confidential, sensitive, commercially sensitive, and competitively sensitive information, and thus it's being rightly protected. And so if that is the case, then we certainly would want to see and would hope to see that maybe if there was any need to tighten up the language regarding competitively sensitive information, that it be tightened up, and that this bill not be have an inadvertent or an unintended consequence of creating a backdoor to getting confidential business information. Another thing that we'd like to point out about the study is, and you've kind of discussed this a little bit, is who are the states in the region and how will that region be determined? Will that be other states in the SPP? Will it be states in our EPA region? Will the states change from year to year, and so that we're always being compared to a moving target? So we think those are some things to consider and may need tightening up in the bill. And if it was a result that the KCC would have to actually open a docket to determine those states and not staff, we don't know the answer to that question, but if that is the case, then there's an additional expense of opening that docket just to even determine the states if that was the case. The other thing that we would want to know more about is, if the KCC goes to this work, a lot of the expense of what the KCC does gets pushed back onto utilities. And if the whole goal is to try and get a handle on rates, having regulatory operations and regulatory burdens getting pushed back in utilities does seem to be a little bit at cross purposes. So we're not opposed at all to having information out there, but we do think that the questions that I've just highlighted here and those that are articulated in our testimony are worthwhile in considering as you consider this bill. So if there are any questions for us, I would certainly be glad to answer those.
Do you have any questions for Leslie? Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a question, but you did raise an issue that I'd already written down. Which states do we put into the study? And I did raise the question of, do we just pay attention to the rates in our SPP group? So I think anybody else who's coming up to the microphones and maybe afterwards see what people think about, do we just make it the SPP, since that's our RTO that we're a member of? So going forward, I think we need to think about that carefully, because that's an impact on our rates.
And I think the results of how we compare could be very, very different depending on which states were put into that mix. So
This is why I think the SPP is stable. I mean, we know who's in the group. So I think, that would help if we're going to look at other states, that we look at ones that we know are in the same bucket as we are.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. The first question is just kind of a curiosity question, so don't take this wrong, but you're with the electric co-ops, and the co-ops, if I'm reading this right, are specifically can elect to exempt themselves from it. So how does it really affect you, so to speak?
I apologize, Representative. I did not bring a copy of the bill before me, but I believe the language of the bill makes it permissive on whether or not co-ops are included in that study. I think it says the language that it does not have to include us, but to us that does not mean that we are officially excluded. And we are public utilities, although that we are able under a statute to exempt ourselves from KCC regulation over rates in favor of self-regulation of rates, that does not exempt us from the definition of being a public utility. And if you look at the definition of the public utility that's referenced in the bill, that statute references another statute which references 104. And we believe that 104 firmly does put us in the definition of a public utility, but then we are able to opt for self-regulation under another statute. So we're out of some jurisdictional aspects, but we don't believe that takes us out of the definition of a public utility altogether.
Very good answer. May I have one more? And this may not be for you, but I guess if anybody wants to jump in there, but I'm looking at the teeth on this thing toward the backside, but what happens with the report? Is it utilized by the KCC for rate regulations? Or to me, I'm questioning, is it just another report that we're going to spend money on that sits out there? And like I say, I don't know if that should be to you or someone else, but.
I don't know that I can speak to the intent of the bill, Representative. So I do think that the bill makes the report available for the legislature and is part of the KCC's annual report to the legislature, if I remember correctly.
That's a good question. What I might ask is if there would be a fiscal note for this bill if it passes. So we might have to check on that before then. So that'd be one thing. Any other questions? Leslie, I might break from protocol here just real quick because we have several new members on our committee. Would you give a 5-second overview of the SSP so they know exactly what you're talking about? I think most of us know what it is and just the number of people in it and how it works in overnight bidding. Just to let them know compared to what, following up on a question that Representative Keither answered.
Sure. The Southwest Power Pool is, they've presented on the Senate side, so I'll use their analogy. They're really the entity that manages transmission across, I believe, a 14-state area, including Kansas. Their description, which I think is very apt, is they're the air traffic controller of the electric movement through that region. They don't own the electricity. They don't, but they manage how all of that gets allotted, and then they have a market where a day ahead, the lowest utility producers, generators, bid their power in, and so their model is to use the lowest cost power and purchase first through the whole system. They estimate the need for what is going to be in the next day, and then through the SPP, we are assured that we are using lowest price power first throughout the region. Is that sufficient enough for today, or would you like me to try and add a little more?
I would like to ask maybe the new members if they have any questions, but it makes sense to me because I'm pretty familiar with it. So does any of the new members have a question? I just want to question. Okay. Okay. I just want them to understand that it's not, the rates are put in the marketplace every night and then you bid on what you're going to use the next day. So it's kind of a self-check deal on how that works. Maybe unless I'm misunderstanding, but maybe it'd be something that you might visit with the freshmen so that you know about, or somebody else. I mean, usually we have a presenter from the Southwest Power Pool, but with the COVID deal, people don't travel. So
certainly, Mr. Chairman, and if I may, they did present on the Senate side and have a very nice handout that was on the Senate side, and I would be glad to send that to Barb if you would like to review it and maybe provide it to your committee as well.
I think it'd be real important for our freshmen on the committee because they need to know where all this is coming to. It just doesn't come out of your electric meter. Thank you. Any other questions, Representative Gartner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Leslie.
Good morning.
Good morning. With your concerns concerning co-ops and municipalities, in the bill on line 29, would you rather see a shell there?
Would you mind if I borrowed a copy of the bill? Thank you,
Right now,
Representative Bourgeon.
Such report need not include any information regarding munis or
I certainly think that, you know, that might be a fix, and we would be, I won't speak for the municipal association at this point. I will speak just for the co-op. So, you know, I think that there's valuable data in having, you know, a broad-based, but certainly we would be willing to discuss that if I can just kind of defer it that way. And not to avoid the question, but we would be glad to discuss that further if that's, yeah. I'm not sure exactly what the intent was, and I know that they've made an exception for us. It's not our intent to totally thwart the mission of the bill, but certainly if it is really targeted at, you know, looking at a segment of the industry versus the industry as a whole, we certainly do not mind being taken out of, you know, other people's issues.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I also want to, if you look at your, well, you don't have a handout, but if you don't, Colin Hanson with the Executive Director of KM, you also signed on with yours.
Yes.
And you, again, for the freshmen, we used to have introductions to all these people so you know who they were. Sorry that we don't have that because this year. All right. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, committee.
Next up in person is Chuck Casey, Senior Vice President, Marketing and Public Affairs of Evergy. Chuck, welcome to committee. Please state your name and who you are with.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you. Ranking Member Keither, good to see you. Members of the committee, I'm Chuck Casey with Evergy, and we're here today to testify neutrally on the bill, like our colleagues from the co-ops and the municipalities. I must admit, I'm pretty darn excited to be out of my dining room and somewhere in person. It's been about a year since that happened, so it's good to see you all in person, even if it's masked up. I also, at Evergy, we start every meeting that we have with more than 2 people with a safety moment. So I've got a safety moment for you this morning, which is being that this is my first time in dress clothes in over a year, I found out something that I didn't know before, which was if you do not wear your dress clothes at least once a month, they shrink. So if you don't want to spend incremental dollars on dress clothes, make sure you exercise them at least a month, once a month. Otherwise, they might not fit as well when you get into them. We're neutral on this bill principally because we're all for transparency. Everything we do as a regulated utility is scrutinized about 6 ways from Sunday, whether it's the KCC, the legislators, interveners, and multiple dockets that we participate in throughout the year. And so we're perfectly fine with that. The reason that we're not supportive is really because we think that this process around rates and rate making is already probably one of the most transparent processes in state government, with an access to information that's really probably unparalleled for any other industry in this state. And so we also don't think that this is going to alter the information that the legislature has or anything that you know currently about rates, and is largely redundant to what's already produced out there in multiple places. Again, if the legislature is of a mind to have the KCC do this, we don't have any issues with that, but would point out, specifically Representative Schreider asked if this was available from other places. The answer is yes. There's about a dozen different entities that all have this information, and it's all pretty transparent. When you asked that question, I actually got out this handy dandy portable pocket computer here, and I went on Google and I typed in state electric rate comparison. And I mean, there is about 600 different things that you can hit and get the rates in every state by average bill, average rate, rate increase. I mean, it's all out there, whether it's from the Energy Information Administration, whether it is from different consumer groups, whether it's from think tanks, whether it's from EEI. I mean, there's an abundance of information out there, as well as this information is also held in large part on our regulator's website as it is. So again, if you want to have this included in the report that comes to the legislature already, we think that's fine. It does have a fiscal note. The fiscal note's $50,000, although I suspect that didn't cost $50,000. So it might not actually cost that much, depending on what's in the report or what we add to the report. We just think that at some point it gets maybe a little redundant to be this prescriptive in statute as to what a regulatory entity that already provides a report about information that's already out there, needs, whether that's necessary or not. I'd also point out, yes, it was a one-time thing, but just within the last 4 years, maybe 3 years, there have been 5 reports done and presented in front of this body with respect to rates, rate competitiveness, and what we can do. One was done by the KCC, one was done by then Westar, and then KCP&L. We're now combined and Evergy. One was done by AECOM, and one was done by the London Economic Institution. So this body has relatively recent, as of 2020, information and comprehensive studies to look at as well with respect to rates. I would also add that, every 3 or 4 years, typically, we're in rate cases which produce thousands of pages, all readily available information about what drives rates, why the rates are what they are in Kansas. We're also in the middle of a workshop series with the Kansas Corporation Commission right now, having to do with our sustainability transformation plan. There are thousands of pages filed in that, which everybody has access to as well. At the end of the day, again, if this is something folks want to do, we don't have an issue with that. We would suggest, though, that the focus just on a kilowatt hour rate, as Paul suggested, my colleague, Mr. Snyder suggested, is maybe a little narrow. If we're going to be prescriptive with the idea of giving real good information with respect to rate competitiveness and the competitiveness of electricity generally in Kansas, then there's probably a few other things we would suggest that get put in there. And I won't go through all of them, but we've touched on some of them in the written testimony that we filed, and we would have an amendment that we'll talk to the committee about that. But things like what percentage of rates are driven by environmental mandates or things outside of utilities control, what's the difference between rates and bills? Bills, Kansas is one of the better places in the United States for an average residential or average industrial bill, whereas rates gives a different picture, and there's reasons for that. And in the Senate committee this afternoon, we're going to talk extensively about some of those things. I'd be happy to come back and do a deep dive on rates, drivers, and our sustainability transformation plan, Mr. Chairman, if you would be interested in that at some point. The point is, if you just concentrate on rates, you may be getting just a very small sliver of what it is that's actually driving, competitiveness from an energy perspective in the state. I would just kind of finish up by saying, we're actually very proud post-merger between Westar and KCP&L. I was before this committee multiple times, not in 2020, but in 2019 and 2018 and in 2017, talking about rates. We said that the merger would be very impactful and in a positive way towards rates. And again, we won't go into everything, but a couple of bullet points, a couple of headlines from that. As of today, we are $315 million lower in our rate structure and in what customers are paying in Kansas than we were when we addressed you in 2018. That's all a result of the merger efficiencies, and getting economies of scale from that transaction. I would note that both in rates and in bills, Kansas over the last 4 years has led the United States in terms of our rates going down versus neighboring states going up, and in some cases not decreasing quite as much as we did. For example, in the AECOM study that this body commissioned, in their report, they point out that just from 2017 to 2019, our residential rates in this state went down 6.4%, whereas the neighboring 9 states went up 1.4%, almost an 8% differential just in 2 years. And in 2020, we are better than we were in 2019. So there's a lot of good things going on. If we talked about bills, that would be the same thing. Kansas had the #1 decrease in average residential bill in the United States, as reported by the KCC staff, using Energy Information Administration information in the Senate Utilities Committee last week. Again, very good news for Kansas from a competitive standpoint. we're neutral on the bill, but would love to have a better picture than just rates if the committee were to decide to pass this bill. And I would be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions, Representative Keither?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I think you bring up a very good point with this bill, is that rates only, it's one part of the story. It doesn't go in and delve to your energy efficiency needs, what and states surrounding us are at a different speed of putting into their rates things that they've had to do for their state. So it doesn't necessarily give a picture that tells us all that we need to know, I don't think. But I do have a question for you. You said that you're in a workshop with the KCC.
Yeah.
What's a workshop?
Well, a workshop, so about, it would have been in August of 2020, we announced our next 5-year strategy. We call it the Sustainability Transformation Plan. And again, I would love to come back to this committee if there's time later this year and talk about that, because there's lots of things that are worthy of discussion, and we'd love to get input from this body as well as the Senate. But a workshop is a place where you can come in and instead of, when we have a rate case, that's a case in controversy. We have a position, staff has a position, interveners have a position, and it's an adversarial process. And I don't mean adversarial in a negative sense, but we all have different positions. They're staked out, and we're moving through a negotiation. It's as close as you can get to a trial, really. And then there's a decision that's rendered by the commission. A workshop is a place where we can come in and we can talk about our plans, things that we would like to do over the next 5 years, and we get feedback from different interveners. That doesn't necessarily include, there's not a result at the end. It's a conversation. It's a chance for give and take in a non-adversarial environment. And it's also a way just to transmit information out to folks. They're all broadcast online so that more people can have access to the information.
Well, I appreciate that, because I don't think we've heard about too many workshops. I know they go on, but I think it's also something for the new people on the committee to understand that you can have a conversation that is a give and take without not super duper consequences. So I think that's good. I'd like to hear that, and I appreciate you explaining that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I have one or two that I'd like you. Been on the Energy Committee for going on my 13th year. So I remember back in the 08, 9, 10 area that we were mandated by Region 7 of the EPA to do billions of dollars of environmental upgrades to our coal plants. Did that have effect on our rate compared to Oklahoma and all the other states around us that weren't mandated by the EPA to do these environmental upgrades?
It's a great question, Chairman Seiwert, and yes, the answer is that because we are both Westar and KCP&L historically, and now Evergy, we're heavy in coal-based generation. That is generation that was mandated that had to go through environmental retrofits. And I don't remember the precise number, but it's somewhere between 60 and 70% of the dollars invested, the capital investment made by Westar and KCP&L between the years of about 2007 through about 2017 were mandated federal environmental mandates, and so, or related to the Southwest Power Pool and the regional transmission organization that we belong to. And so that's not an excuse. We're not trying to get away from that, but I would point out that from about 1988 through 2007, those same coal units produced prices that at the end of those time periods were on the KCP&L side about 42% below the inflation over that same time period, and some of the lowest rates certainly in the United States and competitive in the region. And on the Westar side, it was about 13% below CPI up until 2007. So my point is, this region for 30 years as a result of those coal fleets have gained an economic advantage to other areas. Now, from 2007 through about 2017, 2018, there were a lot of retrofits that had to be done, but we've been mixing in renewable energy, and now I think we're going to stand again at a point in time where our generation base is competitive, particularly with other states like Oklahoma or Colorado or Texas, who have been very, very dependent on natural gas, but with fracking now coming under fire from the federal government, with transmission through pipelines coming under fire from the federal government, and environmental regulations targeting natural gas, I think you will see the natural gas industry see more, or natural gas generation see more volatility. You'll also see constraints on the supply, and as a result, again, we've moved significantly into renewable energy, mostly Kansas wind, and I think you'll see over the next decade or so a resurgence, just like you have over the last 4 years, of real competitive rates from Evergy, respective to the 9 states that surround us.
And it goes back to my question too, again, under the new federal guideline changes that changed effect on January 20th, if we go back to some of these other states around us that didn't upgrade their plants, will that not put them way above us in generation? Because I know when that was a big discussion we had, and even, correct me if I'm wrong, there was some of our costs was put into transmission for the wind farms that the ratepayer had to pay. Now, this is for the newbies. That part of our costs is including transmission for wind farms, and that's under several other items right now, I believe, to take that out of the rate for you. Because we don't know what we're going to happen, especially like you said, years ago, natural gas was banned from generation because of fight, and now we might be right back in that same deal. So all the companies that changed to natural gas to do coal, this is 101, which is actually my district, Electricity 101. Thank you, Mr. Casey. Would you like to comment on the other states if they have to bring that on, or would you rather do that at another time? Because we have a couple of questions that people have come in since I stalled long enough, so.
Yeah, sure. I would just say, look, I think one of the things for the committee to realize as we get into whether we need this or not is that there is a real, as Representative Keither and Representative Delperdang have suggested, there is a real difference in driving factors between the states, whether it's generation, whether it's whether they're urban or rural, or let's just take Texas. Texas couldn't be more night and day different than Kansas. I mean, look, we'd love to have Texas economy. But two things. I mean, so I believe my friend Mr. Snyder played football for Washburn University. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he played football for Washburn University. But nobody takes Washburn University and says, okay, now to see whether they're doing a good job or not at Washburn University, let's compare them to the University of Alabama, right? Why do they do that? Well, because the University of Alabama has a completely different football program. Their talent base is national or international, and you just can't compare the two. So whether Washburn's good or not doesn't mean you can't compare them to Texas. Well, as was suggested, Texas is one of the largest economies in the world. One of the things that drives down electric rates is it costs the same amount to build a transmission line in Texas as it does in Kansas. It costs the same amount for solar in Texas as it does in Kansas, or wind, or a coal plant, or a nuclear plant. The big difference, though, is in Texas, the intensity of use around that, the kilowatt hours that pay for that infrastructure investment, is 10 times greater, maybe 50 times greater than it is in Kansas. That is an inherent advantage they are always going to have. The other thing that makes them very different is that they are a retail wheeling state. They're a deregulated state. So the Evergy of Kansas is only transmission and distribution, and is not actually the generation provider in that state. Now, we can have that conversation about would deregulation be good for Kansas, and I'm happy to have that conversation as well. My point is that as you look at this, the states that you compare to are important, and it's more than just rates. There's a whole bunch of things that go into energy competitiveness, not just a kilowatt hour price.
Okay, we have time for Representative Carmichael has a question, I believe, for you, Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listening to the chair's questions and the conferee's responses, perhaps I'm a little bit confused, because my recollection is that back in the 2007-8 time period, that Westar was not mandated to do environmental upgrades to dirty coal plants like Jeffries. Instead, Westar could have abandoned those dirty coal plants and invested their money in natural gas like OG&E, Oklahoma, did. And now Evergy is saddled with legacy dirty coal that it's made capital investments in to try to clean up. But Jeffries is still one of the dirtiest plants in the nation. And now what Evergy wants to do is sequester these legacy, soon to be zombie coal plants and sequester the cost of those, remaining cost of those, and push it over into the rate base so that ratepayers pay for the bad business judgment of Westar's directors. Do I misunderstand?
I don't know that you misunderstand. I think you've articulated an opinion, Representative, and you're certainly entitled to that opinion. I don't happen to agree with that opinion. You're right. The thesis, I think, of what you said, which was we did not have to, and by we, I will say KCP&L or Westar did not have to retrofit the coal plants that we retrofitted. But if we wanted to continue to operate those coal plants, then there were federal environmental mandates that we did have to comply with. And as a result, we went through a multi-year process to look at the lowest cost available to Kansans and, in KCP&L's case, to Missourians. And universally, what came back was retrofitting the coal plants was a better deal for Kansas customers than it would be to go to natural gas. As we look forward now, a couple of things. Well, first of all, at that time, one of the things was just the volatility in commodity price, but it was also the availability to transmit through pipelines and other infrastructure and get firm transmission of natural gas to where we needed to have it to serve the load in the state. Having said that, you're right. Every day that goes forward, there are more regulations and there are more potential costs to coal plants, which is why, as a combined company, over that time period, we moved from being less than 5% renewable to now, as we sit here today, over that 10-year time period, being 50% of the electricity we deliver to Kansas customers is carbon-free. And a significant amount, almost 4,500 megawatts of it is wind, again, predominantly wind from Kansas. A little bit from Oklahoma. We don't like that wind just as much as we like the stuff from Kansas. What I would tell you is, with the coal base load that we have available today, our plans to start phasing that out over the next 5 to 15 years, we feel like, and the renewable base that we have, we feel like we are competitively advantaged to our neighbors because, again, as we look at on a go-forward basis, natural gas is about to become a lot more volatile and a lot more constrained in supply as we go forward. In the meantime, as you go back and look over the last 30 years, that coal baseload generation has served Kansas from a cost perspective very, very well.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Casely? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. You brought up a couple of stats there I'm kind of curious on, but the last time I checked on specific wind power being used in the state, it looked like the vast majority may be generated here, but it was hitting the Southwest Power Pool and ended up in Nebraska somehow. Now you just said that roughly 50% or more in Kansas is actually being used through wind. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. And I didn't mean to misspeak. 50% of the electricity serving our retail customers, or the 1.6 million customers that we serve in Missouri and in Kansas, it's about 1.1 million customers in Kansas, is carbon-free. And that comes from two principal resources. One is our Wolf Creek nuclear power plant, which is about 15% of that, maybe 20%, 15 to 20%, somewhere in there. And the balance is, again, mostly Kansas, a little bit of Oklahoma, a little bit of Colorado wind that we do put onto the Southwest Power Pool. As the previous conferee stated, all of our electricity is dispatched and air traffic controlled through the Southwest Power Pool, but that electricity comes back and serves our customers through the Southwest Power Pool. And again, I think we're somewhere between about 4,200 and 4,400 megawatts of wind that we will have serving our customers by the end of this year. To give you a rough comparison, that would be the Jeffrey Power Plant that Representative Carmichael mentioned. That would be the Itan Power Plant. That would be the Lacine Power Plant, all put together. Those are all coal-based power plants. It would be roughly the same thing as those power plants.
Thank you. Representative Carmichael, your hand's still up. Is that for another question or just forgot to take it down? You answered my question. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chuck, for coming to committee and talking to everybody. And again, the freshmen, I think, I don't know if you understand how important this committee is. We don't seem to be important being 2 days, but we do have a lot of stuff, and it's very important with what we've done in the last 15 years, I think, on energy and the future of energy. Thank you, Chuck. Next up, virtual, is Justin Grady, Chief Revenue Requirements for the Kansas Corporation Commission. Justin, are you online?
Yes, Chairman Seibert, I am. Am I coming through okay?
You sound real good, so if you could identify yourself and who you are for the committee.
Okay, great, thank you. My name's Justin Grady, and I'm the Chief of Revenue Requirements, Cost of Service, and Finance for the KCC. I work in the Utilities Division. My testimony on House Bill 2181 is actually pretty succinct. The written version, we are neutral on the bill for probably a lot of the reasons that Mr. Casely mentioned and some of the others. We certainly don't have any opposition to providing this information to the legislature every year. But our primary point is that this is information that's readily available. It primarily comes from the Energy Information Administration. There's a couple other entities that put it together as well, but it all really relies on the same publicly available data that utilities provide via their FERC Form 1s or their EIA Form 861s. And, our position is that this information is frequently compiled and presented to both this committee and the Senate Utilities Committee. And so we question whether it's necessary to change the law to require that this information be provided. And I wanted to point out, and we did so in our written testimony as well, that in the event that this committee or the Senate Utilities Committee desires to have this information presented on an annual basis, we stand ready and are certainly willing to provide this information at any time, really. We presented last Thursday to the Senate Utilities Committee and presented a lot of the type of information that the bill would require us to put into an annual report. And I included a lot of that data attached to my testimony today. And so at this point, it's the pleasure of the chair as to how I continue. I could go through that information. It takes me about 20 minutes. I don't know how much time the committee would prefer to spend discussing this. I could do it I could give you 2 minutes of information, or I could go through in detail the data that I presented to the Senate Utilities Committee last Thursday. So I'll just wait to hear from feedback from the committee, and then I'll proceed accordingly.
Sir, all the committee members, you were downloaded a pretty extensive rate explanations on all the different ones. I don't think we need to go through that because you can do that at your leisure time, but I would take the 2-minute version from you. The clock starts now.
Okay, great. I'm going to try to share my screen here then. There's just a few things I'd like to go through. Okay, are you seeing the written version of my testimony?
Not yet, but there we got her.
Okay, great. So just one is that all in Kansas data from 2019.
For just a second.
This information,
Justin,
absolutely.
Justin, can I interrupt you for a second? Can you turn your video off so that your voice will come through with its speed? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Let me know if there's any other issues. So if you look at slide 1 here, this is just the average Kansas electric rate across the state of Kansas. This is not Evergy data, but all in average consumer rates in the state of Kansas. And there was a reference to earlier to 9 states. Well, these 9 states are the states that you frequently see Kansas referred to. These are the 9 states that we chose to use in the rate study that the KCC completed in 2000 or 2 years ago, based on 2017 data. I believe these states are also referred to or used in the London economics study as well. But what you can see is that, as Mr. Casely mentioned, in the year 2019, Kansas's all-in rate reduction was the largest in the country. I have all of the specific states. I mean, I have all of the states, all 50 states attached in the information that I provided the committee in the written form. One couple other quick things. Well, sorry, I'm going to go back to slide 3. One thing you really need to keep in mind when you see these all-in rate comparisons is that it's really sort of a weighted average calculation of, or a really an all-in evaluation considering all of the different classes of electricity customers. And so what you find is that this information can be heavily influenced based on your industrial sales, the proportion of a state's sales that are industrial sales, and then a few other companies mentioned that at the end of the day, because these rates are presented on a purely volumetric basis, the level of your sales, the level of your volumetric usage really matters and really changes the way that this rate comparison looks. And so I'm probably up close to my 2 minutes, but I want to show the committee one other thing. And, you know, again, we stand ready to come back and discuss this information in real detail whenever the committee prefers. But look at this slide. So this is the average monthly bill information that one of the earlier conferees mentioned. And this slide contains a lot of really interesting information. But when you look at, just say, Oklahoma, which we're frequently compared to, and this slide really gives you an impression, really nails down just how important usage is to your all-in rate calculation. So this is an example where this is EIA data for 2019 across the state of Kansas. And Kansas's residential rate is 24.48% higher than Oklahoma's rate. But on average, the average residential customer in Oklahoma uses 25.25% more kilowatt hours of electricity. And so, given the fact that most of the cost of providing electricity are fixed outside of fuel, the natural result to having more billing determinants or more kilowatt hours of sales is this number is going to be lower. But at the end of the day, what customers pay on average, residential customers pay on average, is actually higher than Kansas's rates. So that's just an interesting and important element of the conversation. It's probably the sort of thing that, if this law passes, we'll provide this kind of information to the committee and to the legislature so that there's the entire picture and everybody has an accurate comparison of how Kansas stands between the other states. But I probably went over my 2 minutes. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this morning, and certainly willing to stand for any questions that the committee has.
Thank you. You did go over it, and we will bill you the time that you went over. Yes, sir.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. I have a question for Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I assume the chart we've just looked at in these slides, are they in the conferee's testimony? Because I haven't yet found the testimony for this morning.
Yes, they are.
Okay. When we compare Kansas and Oklahoma, though, what we find is that residential customers in Oklahoma use about 25% more power than residential customers in Kansas on the average. Is that correct? Mr. Grady?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay, so that might mean that maybe it's warmer down in Oklahoma and they have to burn more, run their air conditioners harder and longer to stay as cool as we do in Kansas. Or maybe they like to set their thermostat a little bit colder in the summertime because it's hot and sweltering down in southeast Oklahoma. But the bottom line is electricity costs more in Kansas for a residential customer than it does in Oklahoma. Isn't that the bottom line?
So Representative, good to see you again, albeit virtual. Is a good one, and your observation is absolutely accurate. When you look closely at that chart, and what we didn't have time to go into is you can look at some of the higher priced, quote, priced rate states in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan, and they have higher rates than Kansas, but on average, their customers do not pay, or sorry, on average, their customers do not pay as much for electricity over the course of a year. And so it is absolutely weather, consumer behavior. It could be energy efficiency policies. It could be the average size of the dwelling. But it's accurate that the published rate or the EIA published rate is higher. So per volume, per kilowatt hour of electricity, Kansas customers do pay more than Oklahoma customers. But at the end of the day, because of all of the factors we've discussed, residential customers in Kansas tend to pay less for electricity through the year than Oklahoma customers do. And so if you think about it from the fact that because the costs of producing electricity are largely fixed, outside of fuel costs, and any electricity economist would tell you that, energy economist, then there's a certain cost annually that you have to receive from a customer in order to do everything that it takes to produce electricity. And one customer spends or uses 1,200 kilowatt hours a year, and the other customer uses 800 kilowatt hours a year. Then the 1,200 kilowatt hour customer is going to have lower rates, but they both pay roughly the same monthly bill. That's a simplification, and it's not presented to be an indication that rates don't matter. They do. But in terms of really understanding the driving factors behind why one state's rates might be different than another, volumetric usage and average usage per customer really, really matters. And that's the point of this slide.
But is it possible that the reason we have volumetric usage disparities between Kansas and Oklahoma is in part accounted for by price elasticity? In other words, it's more expensive to use more power in Kansas than it is in Oklahoma.
Absolutely. I believe that price elasticity, electricity is supposed to be relatively price inelastic, but certainly customers will respond. And conservation and energy efficiency, the higher your rates, your individual per kilowatt hour rates are, certainly customers will respond.
Well, we could have this discussion for a long time. I really appreciate what you're saying, but I know this at my house, when the electric bill goes up, the thermostat goes up, and that's price elasticity. It's not a function of Westar's power being cheaper. It's a matter that the price is going up and we have to turn the thermostat up. So I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for the good questions. Any other questions? If not, I'm sure that the freshman representatives have met some of the KCC staff. You can always ask them questions if you have personal questions you want to ask them. We also have Jake Fisher here from the KCC. Jake, if you want to stand up and good game these guys, you know, so you know he's a good contact for you if you have questions that you want to ask some specific reasons, okay? Seeing that, any more questions for Justin? Seeing none, that closes the neutral hearing on our deal. Seeing no other conferees or written proponents or viral. Any other questions from the committee? Virtual or whatever it is. Virtual. Well, it goes viral when you wear a mask or don't. We gotta have a little humor. Seeing no questions, I close the hearing on, what is this one? 2181. On the agenda for Thursday, we have several things going on, you know, and a hearing on 2081. Or 2180. Whew. So, no, it's 2180. That's why I had them mixed up. So we'll see you Thursday. And if you have any questions for anybody, feel free to, people will be willing to tell you any answers you want to know. Thank you, committee. We are adjourned.